Welcome to Chapter 9, Section 3, Video Notes. Just a reminder, anytime we're doing video notes, you always have the option of pausing or rewinding the video. If you miss something or need to pause it to write down some of your answers in your packet, please feel free to do so. Chapter 9, Section 3 is entitled Expansion into Texas. So we're going to see here how the United States went into Texas and took some of the Southwest territories in a war with Mexico. Our two objectives: one is to explain why Mexico encouraged settlement into Texas. So Texas is actually going to be offered to many of the American settlers, and describe how Texas then is going to gain its independence from Mexico. One thing that we have to realize about Mexico back then is it's just a huge area, all the way up into what is today California, Texas, New Mexico, and the regular area that is still considered Mexico today. All this was Mexico back then, and it was a tough place to keep under control when you own that much land. Mexico is going to win its independence from Spain in 1821, and that's when they start to decide to build up their country, similar to what the United States is going to do after they win their independence from Great Britain. So they're going to start to improve their economy, and one way that they're going to do that is to start to trade with the United States and open up some of the restrictions and take those down so they can build up a trade relationship with the United States. There was already an American presence in present-day states, which were New Mexico, California, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. So the Americans were already there. That's what made trade easy to come by for the newly independent Mexico. But as soon as they took over their independence from Spain, they realized what a hard time they were going to have in controlling this area. The northern areas are going to be so far away from their capital of Mexico City that it's going to be very hard to try and strengthen those two areas and have a bond between the northern areas and the capital city. The capital and center of the government in Mexico City is going to be way down almost at the bottom here, and that's going to be very far from their territories, and trying to control parts of Texas and New Mexico are going to be very difficult. They're going to need troops. They're going to need lots of their army dedicated to doing that, and it just wasn't possible to protect that land. Now, since there was already a presence of Americans in some of those lands, the Mexican government kind of figured they could use them as a way to control some of that land. And they're going to invite some of these American farmers in to settle that land. And also, if they're going to settle it and have land of their own, that's going to help the Mexican government have people out there to protect that land. So the American farmers are going to be wanted to come and settle that land to prevent some of the border violations by the horse thieves, some of the Native Americans attacking. They're going to offer land grants to empresarios. Empresarios are like agents. So they were given that land to kind of sell. And they're going to go out and recruit American farmers to take advantage of this very cheap land. And the Americans are going to take advantage of it and start to move out into Mexican territory to settle this land. It's an opportunity for them to farm bigger plots of land, and they have the opportunity then to make money. This was very alluring to the American farmers because it was huge pieces of land at a very cheap price. Between the American farmers and the empresarios, the agents, they worked out an agreement that the farmers would come in to take advantage of this cheap land, but they had to do a couple of things. One was to obey the Mexican laws. They had to make sure that just as Mexican citizens, they followed all the laws that the Mexican government was going to pass. They also had to observe the Roman Catholic faith. That was the official religion of Mexico, so they wanted to make sure that these Americans that were coming in still were following the rules and following some of the cultures that were alive and well in Mexico. both Americans and Mexicans are going to rush at this chance to settle this new land. As you see a picture here, many of these people are coming in to try and settle Texas and have an opportunity to move west and settle some of those areas. The population of the Anglo or English-speaking white settlers from Europe and the United States is soon going to take over the population of the Tejanos, who are Mexican-born citizens. So in Texas, after a while, there are going to be more white American settlers than there were naturalized Mexican citizens. This rush is going to cause a population boom in Texas because many of these people are going to come for the cheap land. No, this isn't a picture of someone from a horror film, but it's kind of creepy, I gotta admit. This is a picture of the most famous empresario. Remember, empresarios are people who are going to be kind of like the agents, the go-between between the Mexican government and the new settlers, and they're going to offer that land. Stephen Austin kind of built a little community with his land grants that he was able to offer, and he built that community because he had some strict rules, and it was a place where he didn't like people who were drinking, he didn't like gamblers, people who swore, people who were lazy, and those people weren't allowed. But he was able to attract many American settlers with the offer that he was able to give them. He was giving them 177 acres of farmland and over 4,400 acres for their stock, cows and things like that, for grazing at a very low price, and that was very attractive to many settlers, and so many people are going to flock to him and live in this little community. He also offers them a 10-year period in which they don't have to pay taxes, so they're able to save money. Again, a very attractive offer for the people. He's going to have 297 families in his little community near San Felipe, and those are going to be called the Texas Old 300. They're nicknamed. But again, a very successful place. They would post posters around that stated "Go to Texas." But many Americans were very confident that Texas would yield great wealth to them. So there was an increasing amount of people that wanted to go there. They also discussed extending the United States boundaries to the Rio Grande. And this is a very attractive land for Americans. Previously, President John Quincy Adams had offered to buy Texas from Mexico for $1 million. President Andrew Jackson later tried to get Texas for $5 million, but Mexico refused to sell Texas for a variety of different reasons. But the desire to own that land and that land to become part of the United States was still there. For a while, the relationship between the Mexicans and the American settlers in Texas was working out, but soon the honeymoon was over. As white settlers outnumbered the Mexican natives, tensions started to grow between the two based on some of the cultural differences. Their views on slavery were totally different. Mexico had outlawed slavery as one of their laws, but many of the settlers that came to Texas to claim some of the lands were from the South, from cotton or sugar plantations and farms, and they brought their slaves with them. This is going to cause a big issue between the Mexican government and the settlers, since they did promise to follow the laws of the Mexican government. Another issue is a difference in language. Many of the Americans are not going to be fluent in Spanish, so communication between the American settlers and the Mexican settlers caused a gap in communication. Another clash is going to come over religion. Many of the settlers are going to be Protestant, and they're going to resist the Catholic faith, even though they had decided that as part of the agreement when they first came to Texas to follow the faith. They decided not to. Mexico is going to respond to this defiance of following the Mexican law and also not practicing the Roman Catholic religion. Mexico's president, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, pictured here, is going to make sure that the Americans are not going to just come in and kind of do their own thing and not follow or respect the laws that were set forth in the agreement. So what's going to happen is Mexico is going to close its borders, not allowing any more Americans into Texas. He's also going to raise taxes on American imports. He was angry at the Americans for not following the laws like they were supposed to, so he's trying to punish them, and anything coming into the United States is going to be heavily taxed. What Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna doesn't realize is he cannot enforce these laws because their territory is just too big. They don't have enough soldiers and enough people to stand out on the borders and make sure more Americans aren't coming in. So the American settlers continue to pour into Mexico. Even though he's saying that the borders are closed, they continue to just keep coming in, and there's kind of nothing he can do about it there. Stephen F. Austin is going to go to Mexico to talk to Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna to try and get Texas a little bit more self-government. They've kind of become self-reliant, and they want more freedom. They want to be able to have their slaves and practice their religion as they see fit. And so he travels to Mexico City to talk with him, and he's denied by the president, by Santa Anna, and he's also going to be arrested and taken into custody by the Mexican government. This is going to lead to many rebellions and start to be the basis for Texas wanting its independence, and going to lead to the Texas Revolution. Santa Anna was very determined to get the Americans to obey the Mexican laws. So he's going to take his army to the Alamo and try and teach the Americans a lesson. Here's what happened. As we can see from the clip, all of the 187 American soldiers are going to die at the Alamo. Some of the women and children are going to be spared to kind of relay the message back to the American government that Mexico was serious about them following their laws. Instead of being afraid, though, the Alamo is going to become a battle cry and motivation for the Americans, and they're going to want independence more than ever for Texas. Here we have another famous Texan, Sam Houston, another name of a city in the present day Texas. As I said, the Alamo is going to be a big motivator for the Texans to want independence, and Sam Houston is going to lead them. The Texans are going to come up with the saying, "Remember the Alamo," which is again going to motivate them and get them fired up against the Mexican army. Sam Houston's going to lead the Americans to a victory in the Battle of San Jacinto. In that battle, they actually capture Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and force him to declare Texas independent. And once he signs that, Sam Houston is going to be elected the president, and they're going to call that area, instead of Mexican territory now, it's going to be called the Republic of Texas. Finally, as president of the Republic of Texas, Sam Houston is going to invite the United States to annex Texas, which means that he wants Texas to become part of the United States. And annex just means incorporate. So it's his desire that Texas becomes part of the United States, and he's going to ask the United States to do just that. But the United States doesn't take Texas in as the 28th state just yet. They are very hesitant to do this because of the issue of slavery. As we talked about before, many of the settlers that went to Texas were cotton and sugar farmers who had slaves and had brought them to Texas to work as slaves on their new land. And the Northerners especially saw this as a threat to the balance of the states had in terms of the amount of representation they had in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. So this would tip the balance in the Senate in favor of the slave states if Texas was going to be admitted as a state. And that is going to delay Texas becoming a state. Remember, we talked about before, the more states that the slave or the free areas controlled, the more power they had in Congress. So this was an issue that they had fought over before, and an issue that they're going to have to decide before Texas becomes the 28th state. Finally, on December 29th of 1845, Texas does become a state, and this is going to make the Mexican government furious that the United States had taken that land that was part of Mexico and made it now part of the United States. To Mexico, this means war, and things are going to start to move very quickly towards a war between the United States and Mexico over Texas. That concludes our Chapter 9, Section 3 video notes. With the information that you just received on those slides, you should have been able to complete your Chapter 9, Section 3 guided reading. If you need to repeat any of the slides, you can do that now. If you've finished, please return your iPad to the cart after you've cleared all the apps on the iPad. Please plug it in, and then you have time to work on your homework for Chapter 9, Section 3 in your packet.